So now that we have our browser loaded and we actually have a page loaded, we need to actually be able to interact with that page. And the first thing that we need to do in order to do anything else is to be able to find elements on that page so we can reference them. So here you can see all the different finders that we can use to find elements. And we can use any one of these finders to find an element. And the reason why there's so many of these is because you don't always have control over the HTML on the page or the elements themselves. So you might have to be a little bit creative in trying to get a hold of a specific element. But there's almost always a way to get a hold of an element on a page programmatically. Let's go ahead and take a look at some of these ways that we can find elements on the page, and then we'll look at the code to do this. The first one here is by class name, and class name is just a CSS class name. So if we have an element that has a unique class name, we can use that. And if there were multiple matches, we can index that so we can find the first one or the second one. Most of these methods for finding an element allow that as well. The next one here is ID, and ID is probably going to be the most useful and absolute one. If you have an ID for an element on a page, you can be pretty sure that that's the one you want. So this is definitely one of the preferred methods. Another one is name here, and so you can use the name property of an HTML element just like you can with ID. And tag name is pretty general case, so this is the actual name of the tag. So for example, if you had a table or an anchor would be an A, you can just use the actual tag name. And probably in this case, you're going to want to index this to figure out which tag you're talking about, unless there happens to just be one tag on that page. We can use a CSS selector, and this is one of the more advanced ways. You can basically use any CSS that you would use to identify an element when you created CSS. So for example, you might actually use the CSS that is used to change the appearance of an element to actually select that element in your test, because you know that that is getting that element. The link text is a useful one. When you're trying to get a link, you can actually just use the real text of that link, and the partial link text is just going to be part of that link text, so you can do a partial match on there. And then another really useful one is XPath, and this one's one of the more advanced ones also, but this is often what you're going to turn to when none of the other ways work, and you can almost always use some kind of XPath expression to get to a particular element that you want on a page, although it may not be as clear if you use XPath. So definitely when you're trying to find elements on pages, you want to use the most clear one as possible, and ID is usually going to be the most absolute and also very clear. But in many cases, you're going to have to resort to different ones, especially if you don't have control over that page, if you're testing something that is existing and you can't modify those pages. But if you are working with developers, or you are a developer and you can modify the page, you really want to make sure that you put IDs on everything, because it makes automation so much simpler.